A man sentenced to burn at the stake never stopped writing about the city that wanted him dead. That's the paradox of Dante Alighieri. Exiled from Florence under pain of death, he spent the last 2 decades of his life creating the greatest love letter ever written to the place that destroyed him. The Divine Comedy isn't just medieval poetry, it's revenge, obsession, and heartbreak bound together in rhyming tercets. But before Exile, before the masterpiece, before becoming the father of the Italian language, there was just a boy in Florence who fell in love at age 9 and never recovered. Florence in 1265 wasn't the Renaissance jewel tourists know today. It was a city tearing itself apart, and Dante was born directly into the middle of that violence. His family, the Alighieri, occupied an uncomfortable position in the social hierarchy. They claimed descent from ancient Roman founders, traced their lineage back to noble warriors who'd fought in the Crusades. Noble blood certainly, but wealth and power, not quite. Dante's great-great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, had died in the Second Crusade, fighting for Christianity in distant lands. That gave the family prestige, the kind of historical glory you could trade on in conversation. What it didn't give them was the kind of money or political muscle that ran Florence. They weren't peasants, but they weren't the Medici either. Dante's father, Alighiero II, and grandfather Bellincione were moneylenders, which was respectable enough, but hardly glamorous. They owned property in Florence and the countryside, enough to live comfortably, not enough to dominate. This middle position shaped everything. Dante grew up with access to education, with connections to power, but always at one remove. He could see the mechanisms of Florence's political machinery, could watch the great families maneuver and scheme, but his family wasn't quite important enough to be players. Not yet. His mother Bella died when he was young, certainly before he turned 14. Medieval childhood was precarious that way. People died, children lost parents. You learned early that the world was brutal and arbitrary. His father remarried, producing a son, Francesco, and a daughter, Gaetana. But Bella's death left its mark. Dante never wrote about her. She appears nowhere in his work, a ghost haunting through absence. Then his father died too, sometime before 1283. Dante came into his majority as an orphan, suddenly responsible for the family's modest holdings. He was maybe 18 years old, managing property and debts, and trying to figure out what kind of man he was supposed to become. Education happened, though the details are hazy. He probably studied at home or at a chapter school, attached to some church or monastery. Grammar, rhetoric, the major Latin authors, standard curriculum for a boy of his class. But the real education came from Brunetto Latini. Latini was something special. A scholar, a diplomat, a master of rhetoric who'd served as an official notary for the Florentine Republic. When he spoke, people listened. When he wrote in both Latin and the emerging Italian vernacular, he was shaping how Florentines understood their own language and culture. Giovanni Villani called him the supreme master of rhetoric, the man who taught Florence how to speak well and govern according to policy. Dante studied under him. The instruction was sporadic, not formal schooling in the modern sense, but transformative. From Latini, Dante absorbed French culture, learned about politics and civic responsibility, began to understand how language could be wielded as power. Latini wrote the Tesoretto and Les Livres du Trésor, works that blended philosophy with practical wisdom, and Dante devoured them. He also befriended Guido Cavalcanti, a poet who would become crucial to his development. Cavalcanti was working in a new style, the dolce stile nuovo, the sweet new style. Love poetry, but intellectualized, philosophical, treating romantic devotion as a path to understanding beauty and truth. This wasn't the crude stuff of earlier troubadours. This was sophisticated, introspective, analyzing the psychology of desire with unprecedented depth. Dante was hooked. He started writing poems young, experimenting with the forms and ideas swirling through Florence's literary circles. And then there was Beatrice. The story goes that Dante was 9 years old when he first saw her. She was 8. Her name was Beatrice Portinari, daughter of Folco Portinari, a banker who would later become one of Florence's priors. The Portinari family lived near the Alighieri houses in Florence's old town. Dante claimed he fell in love at first sight. Immediately. Completely. Without even speaking to her. This is the part that strains credulity for modern readers. A 9-year-old experiencing transformative romantic love. But we're not dealing with modern psychology here. We're dealing with medieval concepts of courtly love with a literary tradition that made idealized devotion into a spiritual discipline. Whether the moment happened exactly as Dante later described it doesn't really matter. What matters is that he built his entire literary identity around this encounter. Beatrice became his muse, his obsession, the organizing principle of his creative life. And the crucial thing is this: she was always at a distance. He claimed to have met her only twice. 9 years separated the encounters. There was no relationship in any practical sense. She married someone else, Simone de Bardi, one of Florence's most powerful men. Dante married someone else too. But in his imagination, in his poetry, Beatrice remained the perfect woman, the embodiment of divine beauty, the gateway to understanding God's love. This is courtly love at its most extreme. Not a real relationship, but a literary construct, a way of channeling desire into art. Dante was performing a role, following a script written by generations of poets before him, but he was doing it with such intensity and skill that he transcended the convention. Meanwhile, actual life kept happening. When he was 12, he became betrothed to Gemma Donati. The marriage was arranged, standard practice for families of their status. The Donati were powerful, connected, exactly the kind of family the Alighieri would want to align with. A dowry contract was signed in February, 200 lire di fiorini piccioli, both spouses unusually young, even by medieval standards. The marriage eventually produced 3 children, Pietro, Jacopo, and Antonia. Pietro and Jacopo both later wrote commentaries on the Divine Comedy, suggesting they inherited at least some of their father's intellectual interests. Antonia probably became Sister Beatrice, a nun at the convent of Santo Stefano degli Olivi in Ravenna. But here's the striking thing. Dante never mentioned Gemma in any of his poems. Not once. She was his wife for years, the mother of his children, his partner in the practical business of life. She simply doesn't exist in his literary output. Beatrice, the woman he barely knew, appears everywhere. Gemma, the woman he actually lived with, is invisible. This tells you something about how Dante understood the relationship between life and art. His poetry wasn't autobiography in any straightforward sense. It was something stranger, more selective, more willfully constructed. He was building a mythology of himself, and only certain elements of reality fit the story he wanted to tell. In 1289, everything shifted toward violence. Florence was at war with Arezzo, and Dante rode with the Guelph cavalry at the Battle of Campaldino on June 11th. This wasn't some minor skirmish. This was serious combat, a major engagement that would reshape Florentine politics. The battle lines were drawn over the same old conflict that had plagued Italy for generations. Guelphs versus Ghibellines, supporters of the Pope versus supporters of the Holy Roman Emperor. It sounds like ancient history now, but for medieval Italians, it was everything. Your allegiance determined your alliances, your enemies, your entire political identity. The Guelphs won at Campaldino decisively. The victory brought about a reformation of Florence's constitution, opening new opportunities for men like Dante to participate in civic life. But there was a price for participation. You couldn't just be a poet or a scholar. You had to enroll in one of the city's commercial or artisan guilds. Dante chose the Physicians and Apothecaries Guild. He wasn't a physician, and he wasn't an apothecary, but it didn't matter. This was a formality, a legal requirement for political involvement. The guild system was how Florence organized itself, how it distributed power among different factions and interests. His name started appearing in records. speaking in councils, voting on measures, participating in the machinery of republican government. In 1295, he was elected to Florence's Consiglio de Cento, serving until September 1296. He was becoming a political figure, not just a literary one, and Beatrice died. 1290, she was 24 years old, married to Simone de Bardi, and then she was gone. The cause is unknown. Disease, complications from childbirth, one of the 1,000 things that killed young women in medieval cities. 3 years of marriage, then death. Dante was devastated. He channeled the grief into philosophy and poetry, throwing himself into the works of Boethius, Cicero, and Aristotle. He was trying to understand, trying to make sense of loss, of mortality, of what it meant that this woman who defined his emotional and creative life was simply gone. The result was Vita Nuova, the new life, written between 1292 and 1294. It's a strange hybrid work combining prose and verse, 42 brief chapters, with commentaries on 25 sonnets, 1 ballata, and 4 canzoni. A 5th canzone is left dramatically interrupted by Beatrice's death, the formal structure breaking down in the face of genuine emotion. Vita Nuova tells the story of Dante's love for Beatrice, from that first sight, at age 9, through her death and beyond. It's organised around key moments: their first meeting, her greeting to him when they were 18, his attempts to conceal his love, the crisis when she withholds her greeting, his anguish when he realises she's mocking him, his determination to rise above pain and sing only of her virtues. There are anticipations of her death, then the death itself, then Dante's mourning. There's a temptation, a sympathetic donna Gentile who offers comfort, but Beatrice ultimately triumphs. The final chapter contains Dante's promise to write something about her that has never been written about any woman. That promise would take years to fulfill, but Vita Nuova established the template. Dante was transforming personal experience, or at least the literary performance of personal experience, into something new. He was taking the conventions of courtly love and pushing them toward the sacred, making Beatrice not just an idealized woman, but a conduit to divine understanding. The style fit with Dolce Stil Novo, the movement Cavalcanti and others were developing. But Dante was already moving beyond it, towards something more ambitious. He was learning what his voice could do, what Italian could do when wielded by someone with his gifts and obsessions. Florence kept churning. Politics in the 1290s were vicious. The city divided between black Guelphs and white Guelphs. Both supported the Pope against the Emperor. That wasn't the issue. The split was about papal power, about how much influence the church should have in Florence's internal affairs. The blacks wanted closer ties to Rome, particularly to Pope Boniface VIII. The whites opposed that influence, wanting to maintain more independence. Dante aligned with the whites. This wasn't an abstract philosophical position. This was choosing sides in a fight that would determine who controlled the city, who got exiled, who got killed. By 1300, Dante had risen high enough to be elected prior, one of the 6 highest magistrates in Florence. He served for just 2 months, June 15th to August 14th. Short tenure, but it put him at the centre of power during a crucial moment. The city was fracturing, violence simmering just beneath the surface, and the priors had to maintain order while navigating impossible political pressures. Dante made decisions, hard ones. He tried to be impartial, which meant satisfying nobody. The blacks thought he was too soft on their enemies. The whites thought he wasn't doing enough to protect them. And behind everything, Pope Boniface VIII was manoeuvring, forming alliances, preparing to strike. What Dante didn't know was that his brief time in power had made him enemies who wouldn't forget. The accusations would come later. Corruption, financial wrongdoing, abuse of office, standard charges for political opponents. Whether they had any basis in reality didn't matter. They were weapons, and they would be used. For now, though, he was still a Florentine citizen, still a poet and politician trying to navigate his city's chaos, still living in the place where he'd been born, where his family had roots going back generations, where Beatrice was buried. The exile that would define the rest of his life hadn't happened yet, but the machinery was already in motion, alliances forming that would tear Florence apart and send Dante wandering through Italy for 20 years, never to return home. October 1301. Dante was in Rome on an embassy, sent to negotiate with Pope Boniface VIII. The mission was straightforward on paper: convince the Pope not to send Charles of Valois to Florence. Charles was the brother of King Philip IV of France, and everyone knew what his arrival would mean. He'd come as a peacemaker, officially, but really he was Boniface's weapon, the muscle to install a government the Pope could control. Dante and the other ambassadors made their case. They argued, pleaded, tried to appeal to whatever sense of fairness they hoped the Pope possessed. Boniface listened, then he dismissed most of the embassy, sending them back to Florence. But not Dante. He kept Dante in Rome, stalling, making excuses, claiming they needed to discuss things further. While Dante was stuck in Rome, essentially held against his will, through diplomatic courtesy, Charles of Valois entered Florence on November 1st. No resistance, the gates opened, and what followed was exactly what everyone feared. The Black Guelphs, who'd been exiled or suppressed, came flooding back. They had Charles's soldiers behind them, and Boniface's blessing above them. Over 6 days they tore through the city. Houses were burned, people were killed. The White Guelphs, who'd been running things, who'd thought they had the situation under control, discovered how quickly power could reverse. Dante heard about this from Rome. He understood immediately what it meant for him. His brief tenure as prior, his alignment with the Whites, his attempts to resist papal interference, all of it had put him on the wrong side of the people who now controlled Florence. Going back wasn't an option. The new government wasn't going to forgive or forget. Conte dei Gabrieli da Gubbio became the new podestà, and one of his first acts was to start issuing proclamations. Lists of names, charges, accusations of corruption, financial wrongdoing, abuse of office, standard political weapons dressed up as legal proceedings. Dante's name appeared on those lists. January 1302, the first condemnation. Then March 10th, the second proclamation. This one was clearer. Death by fire if he ever came within reach of the commune. Not exile with the possibility of return. Not a fine he could pay to make things right. Execution. His assets in Florence, seized, his property, taken. His family still there, his wife Gemma, and their children had to navigate the aftermath of having a condemned husband and father. Dante never saw them again either, though at least they weren't killed. The charges were absurd, everyone involved knew they were absurd. But absurdity doesn't matter when you're the one with power and your opponent has none. The Black Guelphs wanted the White Guelphs gone, and Dante was prominent enough to make an example of. He could have paid the fine initially demanded, submitted to the charges, begged for mercy. Many did, but Dante refused, part pride, part principle. He believed he'd done nothing wrong, and submitting would be admitting guilt he didn't feel. So instead, he became a perpetual exile, a man without a city, wandering Italy for the rest of his life. What does that do to someone? Imagine spending your entire life in one place, your family rooted there for generations, every street familiar, every building holding memories. Then suddenly you're cut off, forever. Not just physically, but legally, with a death sentence hanging over any attempt to return. Dante later described it in the Divine Comedy. One of his ancestors predicts his exile, tells him he'll learn how salt tastes another's bread, and how hard a path it is to descend and climb another's stairs. That's not metaphor, that's lived experience translated into verse. The bread in other cities tasted different because it was baked differently. The stairs in other people's houses felt wrong because they weren't yours. Every day of exile was a reminder that you didn't belong. The early years are murky. We know he was in various places, Bologna probably, other cities in northern Italy. He joined with other white Guelphs who'd also been exiled, tried to organise resistance, attempted to retake Florence by force. These efforts failed. Some through bad planning, some through betrayal, all through the fundamental problem that the exiled whites couldn't match the power of the blacks who had Boniface and Charles behind them. Eventually, Dante grew disgusted with his fellow exiles. The infighting, the incompetence, the endless schemes that went nowhere. He made himself what he called a party of one, breaking with the organised resistance and going his own way. This wasn't noble independence. This was a man realising that collective action among the exiled was impossible and deciding that solitude was better than futile collaboration. Between 1304 and 1306, he was probably in Bologna. That's where he started two works he never finished, Convivio and De Vulgari Eloquentia. Both ambitious, both showing a mind trying to work through philosophical and linguistic problems, even while its author was homeless and hunted. Convivio, the banquet, was supposed to be a philosophical treatise in Italian, a massive work of 14 books. He completed 4. It's a collection of canzoni with extensive prose commentary, exploring ethics, politics, metaphysics, trying to create in Italian what had traditionally been done in Latin, trying to prove that the vernacular could handle serious intellectual work. De Vulgari Eloquentia went the opposite direction, written in Latin but defending the vernacular. A theoretical examination of Italian dialects, how they related to each other, which was suitable for literature, why poetry in Italian could achieve what Latin poetry achieved. One of the first scholarly defences of writing in the language people actually spoke, rather than the language of the church and academy. Neither work was finished. Something interrupted them, something more demanding, something that would consume the rest of Dante's creative life. But before we get to that, we need to understand what these years of wandering were actually like. He moved from city to city, dependent on the hospitality of various lords and patrons. 1306 to 1307, he was with Moroello Malaspina in Lunigiana. Then Verona, guest of Bartolomeo della Scala, then Sarzana, each stay temporary, each requiring negotiation, each a reminder that he had no permanent place. Medieval hospitality wasn't simple charity, it was a transaction. Dante brought prestige, learning, literary skill. His hosts got cultural capital, someone who could write poems praising them, someone whose presence elevated their courts. But it was still dependency, still living on someone else's terms, never certain how long the arrangement would last. And everywhere he went, Florence was absent, the city he couldn't return to, the place where everything he'd built was confiscated or destroyed. His political career, gone. His property, taken. His family, left behind. His friends, scattered or dead or turned against him. The bitterness seeped into everything he wrote after this. The Divine Comedy is many things, but one thing it definitely is an act of revenge. Dante putting his enemies in hell, describing their punishments, settling scores through poetry when he couldn't settle them through any other means. Boniface VIII appears in the Inferno, stuffed headfirst into a hole, waiting for his successors, who'll push him further down. The black Guelphs who exiled him populate various circles, suffering eternally. His political grievances became theological judgments, his personal pain transformed into cosmic justice. But that's getting ahead of things. In the early years of exile, he wasn't writing the comedy yet. He was trying to survive, trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to figure out what came next for a man who'd lost everything. The intellectual work continued. He read voraciously everything he could get his hands on. Classical authors, theological texts, philosophy. He'd always been learned, but exile gave him time to go deeper, to study with an intensity that his political career had prevented. No meetings to attend, no civic duties, just books and thoughts, and the constant work of trying to understand why the world was the way it was. His understanding of Aristotle deepened. His engagement with Thomas Aquinas' theology became more sophisticated. He absorbed Virgil so thoroughly that the Roman poet would become his guide through hell and purgatory when he finally started the comedy. All this reading, all this thinking was preparation. He was building the intellectual architecture that would support the greatest poem of the medieval period. But he was also just trying to get by, finding places to stay, scraping together whatever money he could from patronage or copying manuscripts or whatever work a learned exile could find. There's something almost absurd about it. This man, who would become one of the most important writers in Western literature, spending his days begging for lodging and his nights writing philosophical treatises nobody asked for. The psychological toll must have been enormous. Everything Dante had worked for, gone. His status as a Florentine citizen, his position in society, his home, his family, all stripped away because he'd been on the wrong side of a political split he'd tried to navigate carefully. The injustice of it, the randomness, the way his attempt to be fair and impartial had been turned into criminal charges. He could have been more ruthless as prior. He could have crushed the black Guelphs harder, exiled more of them, secured the white position more thoroughly. Or he could have been more accommodating to Boniface, given the Pope what he wanted, avoided making enemies. Instead, he tried to walk a middle path, and the middle path got him condemned to death. That's the kind of experience that changes how you see the world. The belief that virtue will be rewarded, that justice prevails, that trying to do the right thing matters. All of that gets tested when you're wandering Italy with a death sentence because you tried to be fair. Some people would have broken, given up, sunk into depression or alcoholism, or just stopped caring. Dante did something else. He got angrier, more focused, more determined to create something that would outlast his enemies and his exile. If Florence wouldn't have him, if his city had rejected him, then he'd build something bigger than Florence. He'd write a poem that would make their exile of him look foolish, that would establish his version of events as the one that mattered. But that required time, required circumstances, required finding the right form and the right voice and the right structure to contain everything he needed to say. Around 1306 or 1307 he found it, or it found him. Somewhere in his wandering, probably after he'd given up on Convivio and De Vulgari Eloquentia, he started writing something different. Not a philosophical treatise, not a linguistic analysis. A journey through the afterlife. A comedy, he'd call it, though the word meant something different then. A poem in Italian about a man travelling through hell, purgatory, and paradise. A poem that would use everything he'd learned, everything he'd read, everything he'd experienced. A poem that would settle his scores and explore his theology and demonstrate what the vernacular could do and establish his place in literary history. The Divine Comedy was beginning, and with it Dante's transformation from exiled politician to immortal poet was starting to take shape. The poem started with a man lost in a dark wood, simple enough. But from that opening image, Dante would construct something nobody had attempted before. A complete map of the Christian afterlife, yes, but also a political treatise, a personal vendetta, a theological argument, a love story, a guide to virtue, and a demonstration that Italian could do everything Latin could do, all wrapped in 14,233 lines of terza rima, a rhyme scheme he invented specifically for this poem. Think about what he was attempting. Medieval literature had afterlife visions before, plenty of them. Monks describing their dreams of heaven and hell, morality tales about sinners getting punished, but those were simple, didactic, meant to scare people into behaving. Dante wanted something else entirely. He wanted to put real people in hell. People everyone knew. People who were still alive in some cases. He wanted to settle political scores while exploring the deepest questions of Christian theology. He wanted to make his readers laugh and weep and think, all in the same poem. The structure itself was radical. 3 sections, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, each with 33 cantos, except Inferno, which had 34, to make a perfect 100. Everything in threes, reflecting the Trinity. The terza rima rhyme scheme, A, B, A, B, C, B, C, D, C, pushing forward like a chain, each tercet linked to the next, impossible to break apart. You can't excerpt Dante cleanly. The whole thing flows as one continuous journey, and he wrote it in Italian, not Latin, the language of serious literature and theology. Italian, the language people actually spoke, though not quite the Italian anyone actually spoke. Dante created a literary language, drawing from Tuscan but elevated, capable of expressing complex philosophical concepts and crude insults in the same line. This choice alone was revolutionary. It democratized literature in a way that's hard to appreciate now. Latin was the language of the educated elite, the clergy, the university men. Italian was for everyone else. By writing the greatest theological poem of the age in Italian, Dante was making a statement about who deserved access to these ideas. The Inferno came first, probably finished around 1309. It's the section everyone knows, the one that's stuck in cultural memory. 9 circles of hell, each punishing a different category of sin, getting worse as you descend. The punishments fit the crimes in ways that were sometimes literal, sometimes symbolic, always creative. The lustful blown about by winds because they let passion control them in life. The gluttons lying in filth, the violent boiling in rivers of blood. The fraudulent trapped in various horrible situations matching their specific frauds. But what makes it brilliant isn't the punishments, it's who Dante put there and why. He populated hell with people he knew, people who'd wronged him, political enemies, corrupt popes, traitors to Florence. His old teacher, Brunetto Latini, appears in hell, condemned for sodomy but treated with deep respect and affection. Francesca da Rimini, killed by her husband for adultery, gets one of the most beautiful, sympathetic passages in the entire poem, even though she's in hell. Dante, the character, feels compassion for the damned, even as Dante, the author, places them there permanently. The political dimension cuts deep. Pope Boniface VIII, the man who'd helped engineer Dante's exile, appears in hell. Well, not yet. When Dante visits in 1300, Boniface is still alive, but the damned are already saving him a spot because they can see the future. Dante tells us exactly where Boniface will end up. Head first in a hole, feet on fire, for simony, for buying and selling church offices. This is what exile had turned Dante into, someone willing to condemn a living pope to eternal damnation in his poem. The journey itself follows a clear logic. Dante the pilgrim, led by Virgil the Roman poet, descends through hell, observing, asking questions, occasionally talking to the damned. Virgil represents human reason, the best that classical philosophy could achieve without Christian revelation. He can guide Dante through hell and purgatory, but he can't enter paradise. That will require Beatrice, representing divine grace and theology. The allegory is obvious, but Dante makes it work by treating his characters as real people, not just symbols. Writing this must have been cathartic and maddening in equal measure. Cathartic because he could punish everyone who'd hurt him, could explain exactly what was wrong with Florence and the church and the empire. Maddening because he was creating something enormous, something that required holding thousands of details in his head simultaneously, keeping track of who appeared where, making sure the theology worked, maintaining the rhyme scheme, building toward a conclusion he hadn't fully planned yet. And he was doing this while still wandering, still depending on patrons who might decide tomorrow they'd rather not host an exiled Florentine with a death sentence. The practical challenges of composition alone were significant. Paper was expensive. He probably drafted in wax tablets, then copied to parchment when he was satisfied. No way to easily revise once something was written down. The terza rima scheme meant if he wanted to change a line, he might have to adjust the lines, before and after to maintain the rhyme. We don't know exactly where he was when he wrote most of the Inferno. Probably northern Italy, moving between courts. Verona maybe, or still in Lunigiana. The poem itself gives few clues about its composition circumstances. Dante, the character, is on his journey in 1300, before the exile, before everything fell apart. Dante, the author, is writing years later, knowing how it all turned out, using that knowledge to structure the prophecies and warnings scattered throughout. The Purgatorio followed, probably finished around 1313 or 1314. This section is stranger, less viscerally memorable than hell, but in some ways more interesting. Purgatory, as a concept, was still being worked out in Catholic theology. It wasn't as clearly defined as heaven and hell. Dante had more freedom to invent, to structure it according to his own logic. He made it a mountain on an island in the southern hemisphere, directly opposite Jerusalem. Souls climb the mountain, working off their sins through suffering that purifies rather than punishes. The proud carry heavy stones that force them to bow. The envious have their eyes sewn shut. The wrathful walk through acrid smoke. But unlike hell, this suffering has an end point. Everyone in purgatory will eventually reach paradise. They just have to earn it through time and pain. The tone shifts here. Less anger, more contemplation. The souls in purgatory can still improve, can still learn. Dante, the character, can talk with them differently. Not as someone observing the damned, but as someone who might end up here himself. If he's lucky, the conversations are longer, more philosophical. There's humour that was mostly absent from hell. There's hope. And there's Beatrice. She appears at the top of purgatory, in the earthly paradise, taking over from Virgil as Dante's guide. This is where the personal and theological merge completely. Beatrice, the girl he loved at 9, dead at 24, now appears as his salvation. She scolds him for straying from virtue after her death, makes him confess his sins, then forgives him and leads him upward. The reunion scene is one of the most emotionally intense passages in the entire poem. Virgil disappears without Dante noticing, and suddenly Beatrice is there, and Dante is weeping like a child, and she's simultaneously the woman he loved and a manifestation of divine grace. It works on both levels at once. The theology doesn't diminish the emotion. The emotion doesn't cheapen the theology. Writing this section required different skills than the Inferno. Less invention of punishments, more working out of theological problems. How does free will relate to divine providence? How does time work for souls outside of time? Can the saved in paradise see the suffering in hell? And if so, how do they remain happy? Dante had been studying Aquinas, Augustine, Boethius. He was trying to synthesize medieval theology into poetry, make complex philosophical arguments while maintaining narrative momentum and perfect rhyme. The Paradiso came last, finished just before his death in 1321. This is the section modern readers struggle with most, and even in Dante's time, it was probably the least popular. Heaven is hard to make interesting. Hell has variety, drama, famous sinners getting what they deserve. Purgatory has the climb, the hope, the change. Paradise is eternal bliss, everyone happy, everyone in agreement about everything. How do you make that compelling for 33 cantos? Dante's solution was to make it about light and motion and understanding. Paradise is structured as 9 celestial spheres, each associated with a planet or star rising toward the Empyrean where God dwells. As Dante ascends, he gains increasing knowledge, increasing ability to perceive divine truth. The souls he meets aren't really in different spheres. They're all together in the Empyrean, but they appear to him at different levels according to their virtue to help him understand the hierarchy of blessedness. The theology gets dense here, very dense. Discussions of predestination, the nature of angels, the Trinity, the Incarnation. Dante is showing off everything he's learned, proving that Italian can handle the most sophisticated theological concepts. Some of it is beautiful, some of it is exhausting. Modern readers often give up partway through Paradiso and you can't entirely blame them. But Dante needed this section for the poem to work as a whole. The journey had to be complete. Hell alone would have been just revenge, fantasy, and spectacle. Hell and purgatory would have been about justice and redemption. Adding paradise makes it about the full scope of Christian cosmology, about the soul's journey from sin through purification to union with God. The final cantos describe Dante's vision of God, which he can barely put into words because human language fails. He sees the Trinity as 3 circles of different colours occupying the same space, and within one circle he sees the human form, Christ incarnate. Then his vision fails, his power to describe fails, but his will and desire are already aligned with God's love, which moves the sun and the other stars. That's the last line. After 14,233 lines of tears erema, after hell and purgatory and paradise, after all the theology and politics and personal grievances, the poem ends with love and cosmic motion. Writing the Paradiso must have been different than writing the earlier sections. Dante knew by then that he was creating something permanent. The Inferno and Purgatorio were already circulating in manuscript, being copied, discussed, analysed. He had an audience now, people waiting for the conclusion. That changes how you write. You're not just working out your own thoughts anymore. You're aware of being read, being judged, and he must have known his time was running out. He was in his 50s, old by medieval standards. He'd been in exile nearly 20 years. The death sentence still stood. Florence had offered partial amnesty in 1315, but the terms required him to pay a fine and perform a public penance, walking through the city in a penitent's robe. Dante refused. He wrote a friend that if that was the only way to return, he'd never return. His pride wouldn't allow submission to what he considered unjust charges, even if submission meant seeing his city again. So he kept writing, kept moving between northern Italian courts, kept working toward the conclusion of his poem. Somewhere in those final years, probably in Ravenna under the protection of Guido Novello da Polenta, he finished it. The complete comedy, all 3 canticles, the entire journey from dark wood to divine vision, ready to outlast everyone who'd exiled him. But nobody was waiting to read it in Florence. The city that had sentenced him to burn alive wasn't eager to celebrate his literary achievements. The poem circulated in manuscript among the exile community, among sympathetic nobles in northern courts, but Florence itself remained closed to him. And that reality shaped how the comedy ended up being received. Because here's what happened. The poem was too good to ignore, too powerful, too obviously a masterpiece. Copies spread through Italy even while Dante was still writing it. People who'd never heard of him as a politician or diplomat knew him as the author of that incredible poem about hell, the one with all the specific punishments, the one that named names, and the names mattered. Dante wasn't subtle about his enemies. Pope Boniface VIII, who'd helped orchestrate his exile, appears in hell, predicted to arrive there while still alive when Dante sets the poem in 1300. Multiple Florentine politicians who'd betrayed him end up in various circles of hell, frozen in ice or boiling in blood depending on their specific crimes. The comedy was revenge literature disguised as theology, but it was also genuinely theological. That's the tension that makes it work. Dante's putting his personal enemies in hell, yes, but he's also working out a complete Christian cosmology, addressing serious questions about sin and redemption and divine justice. The personal and the universal exist together in the same text. The manuscript tradition shows how quickly it spread. We have over 800 surviving manuscripts of the comedy from before 1500. That's enormous for a medieval text. For comparison, we have about 80 manuscripts of Chaucer's Canterbury Tales from the same period. The comedy was being copied obsessively, distributed across Italy and beyond, becoming a phenomenon while Dante was still alive. Different versions appeared almost immediately. Scribes made mistakes. They added glosses. They changed words they didn't understand. Some manuscripts include commentary explaining the references, identifying the historical figures, unpacking the theology. Others just present the text raw. No two early manuscripts are identical. This created problems for later editors trying to establish what Dante actually wrote. The autograph manuscript, the version in Dante's own hand, doesn't survive. We're reconstructing his text from copies of copies of copies, all containing errors and variations. Modern critical editions try to work backward through the manuscript tradition to get as close as possible to what Dante wrote, but we'll never know with absolute certainty. What we do know is that the poem's impact was immediate. Within Dante's lifetime, scholars were writing commentaries on it. His son Pietro wrote one of the earliest, explaining the allegory and identifying the historical references. Jacopo, his other son, wrote one too. Both were trying to help readers understand what their father had created, and people needed help. The comedy is dense. It assumes readers know classical mythology, Christian theology, medieval science, contemporary Italian politics, and dozens of other subjects. The references pile up. Virgil, Beatrice, biblical figures, historical emperors, Greek philosophers, Florentine merchants, all appearing in a cosmological framework that maps the entire universe. Early readers approached it differently than we do. They saw it as an encyclopedia of knowledge, a summer of everything worth knowing. They used it for moral instruction, for political theory, for theological education. The fact that it was written in Italian rather than Latin made it accessible to a broader audience, but it was still challenging. You needed education to fully appreciate it. Dante must have known this. He knew he was writing something difficult, but he also knew he was writing something that would last. The ambition is obvious in every canto. This wasn't a poem meant to entertain and be forgotten. This was a poem meant to change how people understood the universe and their place in it. He finished it in Ravenna, probably in 1320 or early 1321. The final cantos of Paradiso, describing his vision of God, represent the culmination of everything he'd been working toward since exile. The journey from dark wood to divine light, complete, all 14,233 lines of terza rima, done. But he didn't stop writing. Even after finishing the comedy, Dante was working on other projects. 2 Latin eclogues, pastoral poems in the style of Virgil, a scientific treatise called Quaestio de Aqua et Terra about the relationship between water and earth. He was still active, still producing, still trying to prove himself as a scholar and thinker. The Ravenna years were probably his most stable since exile began. Guido Novello da Polenta was a genuine patron who appreciated Dante's work and supported him financially. Dante had his sons with him. His daughter Antonia was in a nearby convent. He had a community of intellectuals to talk with. It wasn't Florence, but it was something. Then in August 1321, Guido Novello sent Dante on a diplomatic mission to Venice. The details are unclear. Some dispute about access to the Adriatic, trade rights, the usual Italian city-state conflicts. Dante was supposed to help negotiate. He went, completed the mission, apparently successfully, and started back to Ravenna. Somewhere on the return journey, he contracted malaria, or maybe it was typhoid. The sources aren't specific. He made it back to Ravenna, but was already seriously ill. He died on September 14th, 1321, probably around 56 years old, 20 years in exile, never saw Florence again. Guido Novello gave him a funeral with full honours. Dante was buried in Ravenna, in the church of San Pier Maggiore, later moved to a site near the Basilica of San Francesco, where his tomb remains today. Florence wanted his body back. Ravenna refused. Florence had exiled him. Ravenna had welcomed him. The body stayed in Ravenna, but Florence tried. Multiple times over the centuries, Florence requested Dante's remains. Ravenna kept refusing. At one point in the 16th century, the Medici tried to secretly move the bones during renovations, but Ravenna hid them. They stayed hidden for centuries, only rediscovered in 1865. The rivalry between the cities over Dante's physical remains continued long after both cities had claimed his intellectual legacy. Because that's the irony. Florence rejected Dante while he lived, exiled him, threatened to burn him, stole his property, prevented his return. But after his death, Florence claimed him as their greatest citizen. They built monuments, they named streets after him, they taught the comedy in schools. The city that had destroyed his life celebrated his work. This happened gradually. Florence officially pardoned Dante in 2008, 687 years after his death. Before that, the exile technically still stood. The sentence of death by burning was never formally revoked during most of those centuries. Florence just started ignoring it, acting as if Dante had always been theirs. The manuscript circulation accelerated after his death. Without Dante alive to correct errors or authorize versions, the text became increasingly fluid. Different readings of controversial passages emerged, commentaries multiplied. The comedy became a cultural phenomenon across Italy, then across Europe as it was translated. The first printed edition appeared in 1472 in Foligno, then Venice in 1477, then multiple editions in different cities. Printing standardized the text somewhat, though early printed editions still varied significantly. Commentaries were included, helping readers navigate the complexity. Dante's reputation grew steadily. By the Renaissance, he was recognized as one of the supreme poets, though some critics found his medieval framework outdated. The cosmology he described, the Ptolemaic universe with Earth at the center, was being challenged by new science. The theological certainties he expressed were being questioned by Reformation and Counter-Reformation debates, but the poem survived these challenges because it worked on multiple levels. You could read it as literal cosmology or as allegory. You could focus on the political satire or the spiritual journey. You could appreciate the language and imagery while disagreeing with the theology. The comedy was capacious enough to accommodate different interpretations. Different eras found different things in it. Medieval readers valued the theology. Renaissance readers admired the classical learning and poetic craft. Romantic readers loved the dramatic scenes in hell, the tragic love stories, the emotional intensity. Modern readers often focus on the psychology, the political critique, the linguistic innovation. The influence on Italian literature was immediate and permanent. Dante essentially created literary Italian. Before him, Italian existed as a collection of regional dialects. After him, Tuscan Italian became the literary standard because that's what Dante used. He proved vernacular Italian could handle any subject matter, from the most exalted theology to the grossest physical details. Petrarch and Boccaccio, the next generation of Italian writers, were shaped by Dante's example, even when they disagreed with his choices. Petrarch thought Italian was fine for poetry, but Latin was better for serious prose. Boccaccio defended Dante vigorously, wrote one of the first biographies, lectured publicly on the comedy. The tradition of Dante commentary and interpretation was already well established within decades of his death. Beyond Italy, the impact took longer but was equally profound. The comedy was translated into Latin for broader European circulation. Vernacular translations followed. Chaucer knew Dante's work. Milton was influenced by the cosmic scope and theological ambition. Byron and Shelley studied him. Eliot called Dante and Shakespeare the two greatest European poets. But translation presents enormous problems. The terza rima is nearly impossible to replicate in English while maintaining sense and beauty. The medieval Italian vocabulary includes words with no precise modern equivalents. The cultural references assume knowledge most readers no longer have. Every translation is an interpretation, a series of choices about what to prioritize. Some translations aim for literal accuracy, sacrificing poetry. Others prioritize the poetry, taking liberties with meaning. Some try to preserve the rhyme scheme. Others abandon it as impossible. There's no perfect solution. Reading Dante in translation means accepting you're getting an approximation, not the original. The original has qualities translation can't capture. The sound of the Italian, the wordplay, the way terza rima creates forward momentum, each rhyme pulling you into the next tercet. The precision of Dante's vocabulary, the way he uses technical terms, from theology, astronomy, philosophy, crafts, all woven into poetry that still scans perfectly. He was showing off, absolutely showing off, proving that Italian could do anything Latin could do, that vernacular poetry could be as sophisticated as any classical epic. The comedy is an argument for the legitimacy of Italian literature, made by creating a masterpiece in Italian that couldn't be ignored. And it worked. 700 years later, we're still reading it, still teaching it, still arguing about what it means. The poem Dante wrote to process his exile, and exile his enemies, became one of the foundations of Western literature. The personal impact of the comedy extends beyond literary influence. For centuries, readers have found in Dante's work something that speaks to their own experience. The journey from darkness to light, the encounter with past mistakes, the possibility of redemption, the search for meaning in suffering. This is partly why the Inferno remains the most popular section, not because people are morbidly fascinated with torture, though the punishments are memorably inventive, but because the damned souls wrestling with their choices, explaining how they ended up there, making excuses or accepting responsibility, feel psychologically real in ways that transcend the medieval cosmology. Paolo and Francesca aren't just adulterers, they're people who let passion override reason, who chose momentary pleasure over long-term consequences, who still blame the book they were reading for their fall. That's human. That's recognizable. The punishment, being eternally blown about by winds, barely matters compared to their conversation with Dante. Their story, Farinata degli Uberti, stands in his burning tomb, arguing politics, still proud, still defending his actions. He doesn't regret his choices, he regrets losing. That pride, that refusal to admit error, even in hell, tells you more about political conviction than any treatise could. Ugolino gnawing on his enemy's skull while describing how he watched his children starve to death is horror. Yes, but it's also about revenge consuming the avenger, about how hatred persists beyond death, about the impossibility of satisfaction through vengeance. These aren't abstract moral lessons, they're psychological portraits. Dante was exploring what we'd now call character, motivation, self-deception. He was doing it in poetry, yes, with rhyme and meter and classical allusions. But underneath the medieval framework is an understanding of human nature that hasn't aged. The comedy also offers something rare in literature, a complete system. Dante didn't just describe parts of the afterlife, he mapped the entire structure of reality from hell's pit to God's throne. Every soul has a place. Every sin has a punishment that fits it. Every virtue has its reward. The universe makes sense, operates according to divine justice, has meaning and purpose. That completeness is reassuring even if you don't believe the theology. In a chaotic world, a work that presents reality as ordered and comprehensible offers comfort. The journey has a destination. The suffering has a purpose. Evil is punished and good rewarded. Everything fits together. Of course, this neat order required Dante to make harsh judgments. People he knew personally end up in hell. Political opponents, certainly, but also respected figures, popes, emperors. He condemned Boniface VIII so thoroughly that later popes tried to ban the comedy. Didn't work, obviously. The poem was too popular, too widely copied, too deeply embedded in Italian culture to suppress. But Dante's willingness to condemn even the powerful shows something important about the work. He wasn't writing propaganda. He was working out his vision of justice, divine and human. If that meant putting popes in hell, so be it. God's judgment transcended earthly authority. The political theory running through the comedy is complex and sometimes contradictory. Dante wanted universal empire and universal church, each supreme in its sphere, temporal and spiritual power, separated but complementary. He blamed the church's temporal ambitions for Italy's chaos. He hoped the emperor would restore order and justice. This vision was already outdated when he wrote it. The age of universal empire was ending. Nation-states were emerging. The papacy's political power was declining. But Dante couldn't see that future. He was looking backward to an idealized past, imagining a Christian world united under emperor and pope, each doing their proper job. The irony is that his poem, written to support this vision, survived because of its literary qualities, not its politics. The political theory is now historical curiosity. The poetry remains alive. What kept the comedy vital across 7 centuries? Partly the language, though that's inaccessible in translation. Partly the imagery, the vivid scenes that burn into memory. Partly the scope and ambition, the sheer audacity of mapping the entire afterlife in verse. But mostly because Dante put himself in the story. This isn't an abstract treatise on sin and redemption. It's a first-person journey. We experience everything through Dante's eyes, his reactions, his questions, his fear and wonder, and disgust and joy. That immediacy, that sense of accompanying someone on a journey, creates engagement that purely descriptive poetry can't match. You're not reading about hell. You're going there with Dante, watching him react, hearing him question Virgil, seeing him faint or weep or recoil. The pilgrim Dante changes across the journey. In hell, he's often sympathetic to the damned, even when he shouldn't be. He faints after hearing Francesca's story. He argues with souls. He shows pity where judgment would be appropriate. Virgil has to remind him repeatedly that these souls earned their punishment, that mercy here would contradict justice. Dante the pilgrim learns to harden his heart, to accept divine judgment, to see sin clearly. By purgatory, he's different, more understanding of the cleansing process, more patient with the souls labouring to purify themselves, less emotional, more thoughtful. In paradise he's transformed. The Dante who enters heaven isn't the confused, frightened man who entered hell. He's been educated, refined, prepared for the vision of God. This character development, this Bildungsroman structure, gives the poem narrative drive. It's not just a tour of the afterlife, it's a story of transformation, of learning, of spiritual growth. The Dante who ends the journey isn't the same person who began it. Beatrice's role in this transformation is crucial and strange. She's been dead for years when the poem begins. Dante hasn't seen her since they were young. Yet she becomes his guide through paradise, replacing Virgil who can't enter heaven as a pagan. Why Beatrice? Because she represents what Dante needs to ascend. Virgil represents human reason, which can recognize sin and understand purgation. But reason alone can't grasp divine love, can't comprehend the Trinity, can't ascend to God. For that, you need grace, faith, divine love. Beatrice embodies these. She's also Dante's personal connection to the divine. His love for her, properly understood, leads him toward God. This is why the comedy is called a comedy, why it ends in joy rather than tragedy. Love, both human and divine, redeems. The theological sophistication here is impressive. Dante was working with Thomistic philosophy, Augustinian theology, biblical exegesis, classical learning. He synthesized medieval Christian thought into poetry. The Paradiso discusses free will, predestination, the nature of the Trinity, the structure of heaven, the organization of angels. This is why Paradiso is considered the most difficult section. It's abstract theology in verse. There's less narrative action, fewer dramatic encounters, mostly it's instruction, explanation, vision. Dante and Beatrice rise through the spheres of heaven, meeting blessed souls who explain theological points. Many readers find it tedious after the drama of Inferno, but Dante considered it his highest achievement. The challenge was greater, describing the indescribable, putting divine vision into human language, making theology beautiful. He invented new words when Italian lacked the vocabulary. He created neologisms, bent grammar, pushed language to its limits, trying to express the inexpressible. The final cantos of Paradiso, where Dante attempts to describe the vision of God, the Trinity, the union of human and divine nature in Christ, these stretch language until it nearly breaks. And then he stops. He can't describe it fully. The vision exceeds his poetic power. Language fails. He can only say he saw, he understood, he was transformed. The poem ends with Dante's will aligned with divine love, his desire moving in harmony with the love that moves the sun and other stars. That final image, the love that moves the cosmos, brings the entire journey full circle. Hell was characterized by frozen hatred, by souls locked in their sins. Purgatory was about movement, change, progress toward God. Paradise is perfect motion, harmony, love as the fundamental force of the universe. The Divine Comedy influenced European literature so profoundly that tracing every connection is impossible. Chaucer read Dante. Boccaccio lectured on him. Renaissance writers studied him. Milton knew him. Blake illustrated him. Romantic poets worshipped him. Modernists like Eliot and Pound engaged deeply with his work. But the influence goes beyond direct literary borrowing. Dante helped create the idea that vernacular literature could rival classical texts, that a modern writer could be as important as Virgil or Homer, that you could write in your native language about the highest subjects and create something permanent. He also influenced how Western culture thinks about the afterlife. Our image of hell, with its circles and specific punishments, is largely Dante's invention. The Bible gives few details. Dante filled in the blanks, created the geography, the structure, the vivid scenes that became standard. Ask someone who's never read Dante to describe hell, and they'll probably describe something close to his version. Circles of punishment, souls suffering torments fitted to their sins. That's not biblical, that's Dante. Same with purgatory. The Catholic doctrine of purgatory existed before Dante, but he gave it definite shape. A mountain with terraces, souls working off their sins through appropriate suffering, the possibility of progress, of cleansing, of eventual salvation. His vision became standard. The personal influence extends to how we think about autobiography and confession. The comedy is deeply personal while also being universal. Dante is the protagonist, but he's also every man. His journey is specific to him, his exile, his loves, his enemies, but it's also the journey every soul must make from sin to salvation. This combination of individual and universal, of specific detail and general meaning, influenced how Western literature handles autobiography. The personal becomes meaningful when it illuminates something larger. The individual life becomes interesting when it represents human experience generally. Dante's exile, his bitterness, his grudges, these could have been just personal grievances. Instead, he transformed them into a meditation on justice, power, corruption, redemption. His story became everyone's story. The comedy has been continuously in print since the invention of printing. That's over 500 years of unbroken publication. It's been translated into every major language and most minor ones. It's been adapted, illustrated, filmed, referenced, parodied. It remains required reading in Italian schools and frequently taught elsewhere. Yet for all this familiarity, it retains the power to surprise. Each reading reveals something new. Each generation finds different meanings. The text is dense enough, layered enough to support endless interpretation without exhausting its possibilities. Academic study of Dante is its own industry. Journals devoted entirely to Dante scholarship, conferences, societies, editions with thousands of pages of commentary. The bibliography of works about Dante would fill libraries. This isn't just academic makework. It's evidence that 7 centuries haven't fully unpacked what Dante put into his poem. The classical allusions, the medieval theology, the political references, the astronomical details, the numerological patterns, the linguistic innovations, every element has been studied extensively and still yields new insights. But you don't need to know any of that to be affected by the comedy. You can read it in translation, knowing nothing about medieval politics or scholastic theology, and still be moved by the souls Dante meets, still disturbed by the punishments, still awed by the vision of paradise. That's the mark of great literature. It works on multiple levels simultaneously. The expert finds depths to explore. The casual reader finds a compelling story. Both are valid responses to the same text. Dante's final years were spent in Ravenna, under the protection of Guido Novello da Polenta. He'd wandered for 2 decades, dependent on various patrons, never finding a permanent home. Ravenna gave him stability, respect, time to complete the comedy. He died there in September 1321, probably of malaria contracted on a diplomatic mission to Venice. He was 56 years old. He'd lived to finish his masterwork, but never saw Florence again. The city that exiled him wanted his body back eventually. Florence built a tomb for Dante. It remains empty. Ravenna kept the bones, still has them, won't give them up despite centuries of requests. The exile remains in exile, permanently. That bitter irony would have appealed to Dante. Florence exiled him, condemned him to death, seized his property. Now Florence claims him as its greatest son, markets itself as Dante's city, teaches his poem in schools. The city that destroyed his life now trades on his fame. Ravenna profited from his fame after his death too. The tomb became a pilgrimage site. The city's identity became tied to housing Italy's greatest poet. Every September, they commemorate his death anniversary with ceremonies, readings, lectures. The bones themselves became relics. During World War II, as bombs fell on Italian cities, Ravenna hid Dante's remains in a wooden box buried in the garden of a monastery. They stayed hidden for years. After the war ended, workers discovered them by accident during repairs. DNA testing wasn't available then, so we can't be certain they're actually his. But Ravenna says they are. Florence wants them, and the dispute continues. This posthumous custody battle reveals something about how we treat genius after it's safely dead. Florence destroyed Dante's life, confiscated his property, threatened him with burning. Now they want his corpse for tourism. The city learns nothing from the exile it imposed. It just capitalizes on the art the exile produced. But Dante's influence extends far beyond Italian city politics or tourist revenue. His impact on literature, language, theology, and philosophy created ripples that spread across centuries. Start with Italian itself. Before Dante, Italian wasn't really a unified language. It was a collection of regional dialects, some barely mutually intelligible. Latin was the language of scholarship, literature, theology, anything serious. Vernacular tongues were for commerce and daily life, not art or ideas. Dante changed that. He wrote the comedy in Tuscan Italian, the dialect of Florence, not because it was obviously superior, but because it was his native tongue, the language of his thought and feeling. He made a conscious choice to write his masterwork in the vernacular rather than Latin. This was radical. Most educated people expected serious poetry in Latin. Dante argued in De Vulgari Eloquentia that vernacular languages could be just as noble, just as capable of expressing complex ideas and beautiful images. He wasn't the first to write in Italian, but he was the first to demonstrate that Italian could handle the full range of human experience, from the grotesque to the sublime. The comedy proved his point. It showed that vernacular Italian could describe theology, philosophy, politics, science, everything Latin could handle, but with greater immediacy and emotional power. Reading Dante, you're in direct contact with a consciousness. Latin would have filtered that through classical conventions. His success inspired others. Petrarch and Boccaccio, the other great 14th century Italian writers, also wrote in vernacular. Within a generation, Italian literature existed as a legitimate tradition. Within a century, other European vernaculars followed the pattern. If Dante could write his epic in Italian, why couldn't others write in French, English, Spanish? The standardization of modern Italian owes much to Dante. His Tuscan dialect became the basis for standard Italian partly because his work was so influential. Every educated Italian read the comedy. The language they encountered there shaped how they thought Italian should sound. Dante's vocabulary, his syntax, his idioms became normative. Even now, Italians quote Dante the way English speakers quote Shakespeare. Phrases from the comedy have passed into common speech. The language feels alive partly because Dante used it so vividly 7 centuries ago. But the linguistic influence is just the beginning. Dante's theological vision shaped how Western Christianity imagined the afterlife. The specific architecture of his hell, purgatory, and paradise isn't biblical. It's Dante's synthesis of theology, classical mythology, and his own imagination. Yet his version became definitive for millions. When people picture hell, they often picture Dante's version. 9 circles descending to the center of earth, souls punished according to their sins, the frozen lake where Satan chews on Judas. None of that's in the Bible, it's Dante. Same with purgatory. The Bible doesn't describe purgatory's structure. Dante gave it 7 terraces corresponding to the 7 deadly sins, souls climbing upward, purging their faults. This became how Catholics imagined purgatory for centuries. And paradise, Dante's vision of spheres ascending through planets to the Empyrean where God dwells, influenced Christian mysticism and art. His description of the beatific vision, seeing God as a point of light containing all being, became a reference point for theological discussions about divine nature. Whether you believe in an afterlife or not, Dante's vision shapes our cultural imagination about what happens after death. Popular depictions, artistic representations, even jokes about hell and heaven trace back to images Dante created. His political philosophy also had lasting impact. The Monarchia, written during his exile, argues for the separation of church and state. Not because Dante was secular, he wasn't, but because he believed both institutions served different divine purposes and shouldn't interfere with each other. The Pope should govern souls. The Emperor should govern earthly affairs. Neither should usurp the other's role. This was controversial in an age when the Pope claimed authority over secular rulers and emperors claimed divine right. Dante's argument that political authority derives from natural law, not from the Church, influenced later thinkers developing theories of secular government. The idea that temporal and spiritual powers should remain separate became foundational to modern political philosophy, though Dante himself would have been horrified by how thoroughly secular modern states became. His influence on literature is incalculable. Every major Western writer from Chaucer onward knew Dante. Chaucer borrowed from him. Milton structured Paradise Lost partly in response to the comedy. Blake illustrated it, Byron invoked it, Eliot quoted it extensively. Joyce modelled aspects of Ulysses on Dante's journey structure. The list goes on. Borges, Beckett, Calvino, Heaney. Writers keep returning to Dante, finding new things, new ways to use his work. Sometimes they borrow his structure, sometimes his imagery. Sometimes they're arguing with him, challenging his theology or his punishments, but they can't ignore him. And it's not just writers. Visual artists have been illustrating the comedy since medieval manuscripts. Botticelli created drawings for it. Gustave Doré's engravings became the most famous visual interpretation. William Blake painted watercolours. Salvador Dali made woodcuts. Contemporary artists still produce new versions. The poem lends itself to visual interpretation because Dante's imagery is so concrete. He doesn't describe hell abstractly. He gives you specific details. The wood of suicides that bleeds when you break branches, the thieves transforming into serpents, the corrupt politicians boiling in pitch. Artists can picture these scenes. Film has tackled it too, though less successfully. The comedy structure doesn't adapt easily to cinema. Its power comes from accumulation, from the steady progression through 100 cantos, meeting soul after soul. Films compress, and compression loses the rhythm. But the influence extends beyond direct adaptations. Any story about a journey through the underworld owes something to Dante. Any narrative using the structure of descent and ascent echoes him. The archetypal pattern he perfected, the hero's journey through darkness to enlightenment, became a template used in everything from epic poetry to video games. His numerology influenced how literature uses number symbolism. The comedy's obsession with 3, 9, 10. These aren't arbitrary. They carry meaning. 3 for the Trinity, 9 for the orders of angels, 10 for perfection. Dante wove number patterns through the entire structure. Later writers picked up on this, embedding numerical structures in their own works. Joyce's Ulysses has 18 episodes corresponding to the hours of the day and the chapters of Homer's Odyssey. Nabokov played games with numbers in Pale Fire. This tradition of using mathematical structure for artistic purposes traces partly to Dante's example. His psychological insight influenced how literature represents consciousness. The souls Dante meets aren't just examples of sin or virtue. They're individuals, complex and contradictory. Francesca in Circle 2 still loves Paolo, despite knowing their love led to damnation. Ulysses in Circle 8 remains curious and bold, even in punishment. Dante understood that people contain contradictions, that sinners aren't simply evil, that the saved aren't simply good. This psychological complexity became standard in literature, but it wasn't always. Medieval literature often dealt in types. Dante gave us individuals. The first-person narrative structure influenced confessional literature. The comedy is Dante's journey, told by Dante. His fear, his pity, his anger, his joy, these are part of the poem. The narrator is a character, changing as the journey progresses. This technique of the author as character within the narrative became crucial to later literature. Augustine's Confessions did this earlier, but Dante brought it to poetry and made it central to the epic tradition. When Wordsworth writes The Prelude or Whitman writes Song of Myself, they're working in a tradition Dante helped establish. The self as worthy subject, the interior journey as important as external adventure. His influence on theology extended beyond popular imagination of the afterlife. Theologians studied the comedy seriously, debating his interpretations of doctrine, his placement of souls, his cosmology. Some defended him, others attacked him, but they engaged with his work as theology, not just poetry. This created a strange situation. Dante wasn't a theologian by training, he was a poet, but his poetic vision was so powerful, so comprehensive, that it became a theological text requiring scholarly response. The boundary between literature and theology blurred. That blurring continues. People still debate whether Dante's God is just, whether his punishments fit the crimes, whether his vision of divine love encompasses enough mercy. These aren't just literary questions, they're theological ones. The poem demands both aesthetic and moral response. And the moral questions matter because Dante made them matter. He didn't just describe hell, he made you feel the horror of eternal punishment. He didn't just describe paradise, he tried to convey the joy of union with God. The emotional power of his writing forces readers to consider what justice means, what love means, what eternity means. The comedy's accessibility contributed to its influence. Despite its complexity, its thousands of allusions, its dense symbolism, The basic story remains clear. A man lost in a dark wood, a journey through hell, a climb up purgatory, an ascent to heaven. Anyone can follow that. This combination of surface clarity and deeper complexity made it work for different audiences. Medieval readers found different things than modern readers. Catholics interpret it differently than Protestants or secular readers, but all can engage with it at some level. Translation helped spread influence beyond Italy. The first English translation appeared in the 16th century. More followed. By the 19th century, dozens of English versions existed. French, German, Spanish, eventually every major language. Each translation is an interpretation. Dante's Terza Rima doesn't work in English, so translators must choose. Preserve the rhyme and sacrifice literal meaning? Preserve the meaning and abandon the rhyme? Use contemporary English or archaic forms. Different translators made different choices, creating different Dante. John Ciardi's version emphasizes narrative drive. Robert Pinsky's maintained some sonic effects of the original. Clive James used quatrains instead of tercets. Each translation reveals different aspects of the original. This multiplication of versions actually increased influence. Readers who can't access medieval Italian can still experience the comedy, even if filtered through translation. The core power survives linguistic transfer. Dante's impact on Italian culture specifically deserves mention. He's a national icon, perhaps the national icon. His face appears on currency. His image is everywhere. Italian schoolchildren memorize passages. The comedy is required reading. This creates interesting dynamics. Dante becomes a symbol of Italian identity, but that identity didn't exist in his time. Italy wasn't unified until 1861. Dante died 5.5 centuries before Italy became a nation. Yet he's claimed as the father of Italian language and literature. This retroactive nationalism isn't unique to Italy, but it's particularly strong with Dante. He becomes the proof that Italian culture existed before the Italian state, that the language and literature unified the peninsula before politics did. Whether Dante would have wanted this role is questionable. He imagined himself as part of Christendom, not a proto-Italian nationalist. His loyalty was to Florence, or rather to his idealized vision of Florence, not to some future unified Italy. But history uses its heroes however it needs them. The 700th anniversary of his death in 2021 prompted worldwide commemorations, new translations, new editions, conferences, performances. The Pope gave a speech about him. Politicians invoked him. He remains culturally alive in ways most medieval authors don't. Ravenna profited from his fame after his death too. The tomb became a pilgrimage site. The city's identity became tied to housing Italy's greatest poet. Every September they commemorate his death anniversary with ceremonies, readings, lectures. The bones themselves became relics. During World War II, as bombs fell on Italian cities, Ravenna hid Dante's remains in a wooden box buried in the garden of a monastery. They stayed hidden for years. After the war ended, workers discovered them by accident during repairs. DNA testing wasn't available then, so we can't be certain they're actually his. But Ravenna says they are, Florence wants them, and the dispute continues. This posthumous custody battle reveals something about how we treat genius after it's safely dead. Florence destroyed Dante's life, confiscated his property, threatened him with burning. Now they want his corpse for tourism. The city learns nothing from the exile it imposed. It just capitalizes on the art the exile produced. But Dante's influence extends far beyond Italian city politics or tourist revenue. His impact on literature, language, theology, and philosophy created ripples that spread across centuries. Start with Italian itself. Before Dante, Italian wasn't really a unified language. It was a collection of regional dialects, some barely mutually intelligible. Latin was the language of scholarship, literature, theology, anything serious. Vernacular tongues were for commerce and daily life, not art or ideas. Dante changed that. He wrote the comedy in Tuscan Italian, the dialect of Florence, not because it was obviously superior, but because it was his native tongue, the language of his thought and feeling. He made a conscious choice to write his masterwork in the vernacular rather than Latin. This was radical. Most educated people expected serious poetry in Latin. Dante argued in De Vulgari Eloquentia that vernacular languages could be just as noble, just as capable of expressing complex ideas and beautiful images. He wasn't the first to write in Italian, but he was the first to demonstrate that Italian could handle the full range of human experience, from the grotesque to the sublime. The comedy proved his point. It showed that vernacular Italian could describe theology, philosophy, politics, science, everything Latin could handle, but with greater immediacy and emotional power. Reading Dante, you're in direct contact with a consciousness. Latin would have filtered that through classical conventions. His success inspired others. Petrarch and Boccaccio, the other great 14th century Italian writers, also wrote in vernacular. Within a generation, Italian literature existed as a legitimate tradition. Within a century, other European vernaculars followed the pattern. If Dante could write his epic in Italian, why couldn't others write in French, English, Spanish? The standardization of modern Italian owes much to Dante. His Tuscan dialect became the basis for standard Italian partly because his work was so influential. Every educated Italian read the comedy. The language they encountered there shaped how they thought Italian should sound. Dante's vocabulary, his syntax, his idioms became normative. Even now, Italians quote Dante the way English speakers quote Shakespeare. Phrases from the comedy have passed into common speech. The language feels alive partly because Dante used it so vividly 7 centuries ago. But the linguistic influence is just the beginning. Dante's theological vision shaped how Western Christianity imagined the afterlife. The specific architecture of his hell, purgatory, and paradise isn't biblical. It's Dante's synthesis of theology, classical mythology, and his own imagination. Yet his version became definitive for millions. When people picture hell, they often picture Dante's version. 9 circles descending to the center of earth, souls punished according to their sins, the frozen lake where Satan chews on Judas. None of that's in the Bible, it's Dante. Same with purgatory. The Bible doesn't describe purgatory's structure. Dante gave it 7 terraces corresponding to the 7 deadly sins. Souls climbing upward, purging their faults. This became how Catholics imagined purgatory for centuries. And paradise. Dante's vision of spheres ascending through planets to the Empyrean where God dwells influenced Christian mysticism and art. His description of the beatific vision, seeing God as a point of light containing all being, became a reference point for theological discussions about divine nature. Whether you believe in an afterlife or not, Dante's vision shapes our cultural imagination about what happens after death. Popular depictions, artistic representations, even jokes about hell and heaven trace back to images Dante created. His political philosophy also had lasting impact. The Monarchia, written during his exile, argues for the separation of church and state. Not because Dante was secular, he wasn't, but because he believed both institutions served different divine purposes and shouldn't interfere with each other. The Pope should govern souls. The Emperor should govern earthly affairs. Neither should usurp the other's role. This was controversial in an age when the Pope claimed authority over secular rulers and emperors claimed divine right. Dante's argument that political authority derives from natural law, not from the church, influenced later thinkers developing theories of secular government. The idea that temporal and spiritual powers should remain separate became foundational to modern political philosophy, though Dante himself would have been horrified by how thoroughly secular modern states became. His influence on literature is incalculable. Every major Western writer from Chaucer onward knew Dante. Chaucer borrowed from him. Milton structured Paradise Lost, partly in response to the comedy. Blake illustrated it. Byron invoked it. Eliot quoted it extensively. Joyce modelled aspects of Ulysses on Dante's journey structure. The list goes on. Borges, Beckett, Calvino, Heaney. Writers keep returning to Dante, finding new things, new ways to use his work. Sometimes they borrow his structure, sometimes his imagery. Sometimes they're arguing with him, challenging his theology or his punishments, but they can't ignore him. And it's not just writers. Visual artists have been illustrating the comedy since medieval manuscripts. Botticelli created drawings for it. Gustave Doré's engravings became the most famous visual interpretation. William Blake painted watercolours. Salvador Dalí made woodcuts. Contemporary artists still produce new versions. The poem lends itself to visual interpretation because Dante's imagery is so concrete. He doesn't describe hell abstractly. He gives you specific details. The wood of suicides that bleeds when you break branches. The thieves transforming into serpents. The corrupt politicians boiling in pitch. Artists can picture these scenes. Film has tackled it too, though less successfully. The comedy's structure doesn't adapt easily to cinema. Its power comes from accumulation, from the steady progression through 100 cantos, meeting soul after soul. Films compress, and compression loses the rhythm. But the influence extends beyond direct adaptations. Any story about a journey through the underworld owes something to Dante. Any narrative using the structure of descent and ascent echoes him. The archetypal pattern he perfected, the hero's journey, through darkness to enlightenment, became a template used in everything from epic poetry to video games. His numerology influenced how literature uses number symbolism. The comedy's obsession with 3, 9, 10. These aren't arbitrary. They carry meaning. 3 for the Trinity, 9 for the orders of angels, 10 for perfection. Dante wove number patterns through the entire structure. Later writers picked up on this, embedding numerical structures in their own works. Joyce's Ulysses has 18 episodes corresponding to the hours of the day and the chapters of Homer's Odyssey. Nabokov played games with numbers in pale fire. This tradition of using mathematical structure for artistic purposes traces partly to Dante's example. His psychological insight influenced how literature represents consciousness. The souls Dante meets aren't just examples of sin or virtue. They're individuals, complex and contradictory. Francesca in Circle 2 still loves Paolo despite knowing their love led to damnation. Ulysses in Circle 8 remains curious and bold even in punishment. Dante understood that people contained contradictions, that sinners aren't simply evil, that the saved aren't simply good. This psychological complexity became standard in literature, but it wasn't always. Medieval literature often dealt in types. Dante gave us individuals. The first-person narrative structure influenced confessional literature. The comedy is Dante's journey, told by Dante. His fear, his pity, his anger, his joy, these are part of the poem. The narrator is a character, changing as the journey progresses. This technique of the author, as character within the narrative, became crucial to later literature. Augustine's Confessions did this earlier, but Dante brought it to poetry and made it central to the epic tradition. When Wordsworth writes the Prelude or Whitman writes Song of Myself, they're working in a tradition Dante helped establish. The self as worthy subject, the interior journey as important as external adventure. His influence on theology extended beyond popular imagination of the afterlife. Theologians studied the comedy seriously, debating his interpretations of doctrine, his placement of souls, his cosmology. Some defended him, others attacked him. But they engaged with his work as theology, not just poetry. This created a strange situation. Dante wasn't a theologian by training. He was a poet, but his poetic vision was so powerful, so comprehensive, that it became a theological text requiring scholarly response. The boundary between literature and theology blurred. That blurring continues. People still debate whether Dante's God is just, whether his punishments fit the crimes, whether his vision of divine love encompasses enough mercy. These aren't just literary questions, they're theological ones. The poem demands both aesthetic and moral response. And the moral questions matter because Dante made them matter. He didn't just describe hell, he made you feel the horror of eternal punishment. He didn't just describe paradise, he tried to convey the joy of union with God. The emotional power of his writing forces readers to consider what justice means, what love means, what eternity means. The comedy's accessibility contributed to its influence. Despite its complexity, its thousands of allusions, its dense symbolism, the basic story remains clear. A man lost in a dark wood, a journey through hell, a climb up purgatory, an ascent to heaven. Anyone can follow that. This combination of surface clarity and deeper complexity made it work for different audiences. Medieval readers found different things than modern readers. Catholics interpret it differently than Protestants or secular readers, but all can engage with it at some level. Translation helped spread influence beyond Italy. The first English translation appeared in the 16th century. More followed. By the 19th century, dozens of English versions existed. French, German, Spanish, eventually every major language. Each translation is an interpretation. Dante's Tirza Rima doesn't work in English, so translators must choose. Preserve the rhyme and sacrifice literal meaning? Preserve the meaning and abandon the rhyme? Use contemporary English or archaic forms? Different translators made different choices, creating different Dante. John Ciardi's version emphasizes narrative drive. Robert Pinsky's maintained some sonic effects of the original. Clive James used quatrains instead of tercets. Each translation reveals different aspects of the original. This multiplication of versions actually increased influence. Readers who can't access medieval Italian can still experience the comedy, even if filtered through translation. The core power survives linguistic transfer. Dante's impact on Italian culture specifically deserves mention. He's a national icon, perhaps the national icon. His face appears on currency. His image is everywhere. Italian school children memorize passages. The comedy is required reading. This creates interesting dynamics. Dante becomes a symbol of Italian identity, but that identity didn't exist in his time. Italy wasn't unified until 1861. Dante died 5.5 centuries before Italy became a nation. Yet he's claimed as the father of Italian language and literature. This retroactive nationalism isn't unique to Italy, but it's particularly strong with Dante. He becomes the proof that Italian culture existed before the Italian state, that the language and literature unified the peninsula before politics did. Whether Dante would have wanted this role is questionable. He imagined himself as part of Christendom, not a proto-Italian nationalist. His loyalty was to Florence, or rather to his idealized vision of Florence, not to some future unified Italy. But history uses its heroes however it needs them. The 700th anniversary of his death in 2021 prompted worldwide commemorations, new translations, new editions, conferences, performances. The Pope gave a speech about him. Politicians invoked him. He remains culturally alive in ways most medieval authors don't. Part of this continued vitality comes from the comedy's refusal to be easily categorized. It's a religious poem by a layman, a political tract disguised as vision, a personal vendetta elevated to universal judgment, an epic in vernacular, a journey that's simultaneously literal and allegorical. These contradictions keep it interesting. You can approach it from countless angles and find something new. As literature, as theology, as history, as philosophy, as autobiography. The text supports all these readings without being exhausted by any of them, and the questions it raises remain urgent. What does justice require? How should we judge others? What's the relationship between earthly power and spiritual authority? How do we make sense of suffering? What gives life meaning? Dante offers answers, but they're complex answers that generate further questions. His God is love, but also justice. His hell is horrible, but deserved. His paradise is blissful, but hierarchical. Nothing is simple. This complexity reflects the complexity of medieval thought at its best. The stereotypical view of the Middle Ages as intellectually primitive doesn't survive contact with Dante. His mind was as sophisticated as any modern philosopher's, working with different premises but equal rigor. Reading the comedy now means engaging with that medieval worldview, not to accept it necessarily, but to understand how intelligent people organized reality before modern categories existed. Before the separation of church and state, before psychological interiority as we understand it, before the scientific method, Dante gives us access to a fully realized alternative way of seeing the world, one where everything connects to everything else through divine plan, where numbers carry symbolic weight, where poetry can reveal divine truth, where personal grudges and cosmic justice intertwine without contradiction. This isn't our world anymore. We've inherited different structures, different assumptions. Science explains natural phenomena. Psychology explores the mind. Politics separates from religion, at least nominally. We don't organize reality through theological frameworks the way Dante did. Yet the comedy still speaks. Why? Because beneath the medieval cosmology, beneath the specific Catholic doctrine, beneath the political vendettas and the dated astronomy, there's something else. A human consciousness trying to make sense of existence, asking why we suffer, what justice means, how love transforms us, whether our choices matter. These questions don't age. Dante's answers are medieval, but his questions are eternal. Consider what he achieved technically. He created a narrative structure that supports 100 cantos without collapsing. Each canto advances the journey while functioning as a complete unit. The pacing varies, sometimes lingering in conversation, sometimes rushing through regions. But it never drags, never loses momentum across 14,000 lines. The terza rima creates constant forward motion. Each tercet links to the next, through rhyme. You can't stop cleanly until the canto ends. The form itself propels you onward, mimicking the journey's inexorable progression toward God. And the symmetry? 3 canticles, 33 cantos each, plus 1 introductory canto, making 100 total. 9 circles of hell, 7 terraces of purgatory, 9 spheres of heaven. Everything organized in patterns reflecting divine order. The numbers aren't arbitrary decoration, they're structural DNA. This mathematical precision coexists with emotional intensity. Ugolino's cannibalism, Francesca's doomed love, Picarda's gentle wisdom, Cacciaguida's prophecy. These moments burn through the architecture, human and immediate despite the formal constraints. Dante understood that great art needs both. Structure without emotion is sterile. Emotion without structure is chaos. He balanced them perfectly. The allegory operates on multiple levels simultaneously. There's the literal journey through afterlife realms, the moral allegory about sin and virtue, the political allegory about empire and papacy, the personal allegory of Dante's spiritual development, all present at once, reinforcing each other. This density rewards rereading. You can approach the comedy focusing on different aspects each time. One reading for the narrative, another for the theology, another for the politics, another for the poetry itself. The text accommodates all these approaches without fracturing. Modern readers sometimes resist allegory, We prefer psychological realism, ambiguity, complex motivation. Medieval allegory feels heavy-handed by comparison. Characters represent ideas more than embodying fully realized individuals. But Dante transcends typical allegory through specificity. His sinners aren't generic representatives of sin categories. They're specific Florentines with personal histories. Francesca isn't just lust. She's a woman who fell in love with her husband's brother while reading Lancelot. The romance she was reading becomes part of her damnation. That detail makes her real. This specificity creates a problem for modern readers. Who are these people? Why should we care about Florentine political figures from 700 years ago? The footnotes required to understand the contemporary references can overwhelm the poetry. Yet the comedy survives this barrier, even without knowing who Farinata degli Uberti was historically. You understand his pride, his defiance, his tragic nobility. The universal emerges through the particular. Dante's genius was making local vendettas carry cosmic weight. The emotional range is remarkable. Terror in Malabulge, tenderness with Beatrice, philosophical contemplation in Paradise, rage at corrupt popes, pity for the lustful, wonder at divine light, disgust at traitors. The comedy contains all of human feeling, organized and transformed by its journey structure. Paradise presents special challenges. How do you make perfect happiness interesting? Drama requires conflict. Heaven has none. Everyone there is completely fulfilled. Yet Dante needed 33 cantos to complete his structure. His solution was to make Paradise educational rather than dramatic. The blessed souls don't struggle or change. They teach. They explain theology, astronomy, history. They prepare Dante to comprehend the beatific vision. The canticle becomes increasingly abstract and light-filled as it ascends. Many readers find Paradise less engaging than Inferno. Suffering is inherently more dramatic than bliss. Hell's punishments are vivid and varied. Heaven's rewards blur into radiance. This isn't failure. It's the inevitable challenge of depicting perfection. But Paradise contains the comedy's culmination. Everything builds toward the final canto where Dante glimpses God directly. The vision itself defeats language. He can't describe what he saw, only that he saw it. The poem ends in failure to represent its ultimate subject. This failure is deliberate. God exceeds representation. Language collapses before the infinite. Dante can only gesture toward the experience, using metaphors that immediately acknowledge their inadequacy. The final lines abandon even metaphor, settling for the bare fact that he saw and was transformed. That transformation is what mattered. The journey changed him. He entered the dark wood lost and confused. He emerged with understanding, purpose, alignment with divine will. The mechanism of change was the journey itself, descending through evil, ascending through purgation, finally rising to perfect love. The autobiographical dimension remains powerful. This is Dante writing himself salvation. He was exiled, bitter, convinced of his own righteousness and Florence's corruption. The comedy allows him to judge everyone, place them in their deserved locations, vindicate himself, condemn his enemies. But it's more than wish fulfillment. It's self-examination. Dante, the character, makes mistakes, needs correction, misunderstands what he sees. He pities the damned when he should accept their justice. He fails to comprehend divine mysteries until they're explained multiple times. He's not the hero. He's the student. This humility, real or performed, makes the comedy something beyond propaganda. Dante could have written himself as always right, his enemies as obviously wrong. Instead, he shows himself learning, struggling, growing. The journey transforms him, which is the point. The political vision embedded in the comedy failed completely. Dante hoped for an emperor who would restore justice and separate earthly from spiritual power. It never happened. The Holy Roman Empire continued declining. The papacy remained enmeshed in temporal politics. Florence stayed corrupt. His literary vision succeeded beyond anything he imagined. The comedy established Tuscan Italian as a literary language. It proved vernacular could handle the highest subjects. It created a template for epic poetry in modern languages. It influenced everything that came after. Writers across centuries have responded to Dante. Chaucer borrowed from him. Milton knew him. Blake illustrated him. Eliot quoted him. Borges returned to him constantly. The conversation continues because the comedy remains essential. What does it mean for a medieval poem to be essential in the 21st century? Not that we accept its theology, not that we share its politics, but that we recognize in it a consciousness as complex as our own, working through problems that haven't been solved. Dante offers us a complete world, not the world as it is, but a world as it might be understood if divine justice actually operated visibly, if people got what they deserved, if meaning was built into reality's structure, if love really did move the sun and other stars. We don't believe this anymore, most of us, but we can inhabit it imaginatively. We can experience what it would feel like to live in a universe where everything connects, where choices have eternal consequences, where the moral order is real and knowable. That experience has value even for non-believers. Maybe especially for non-believers. It shows us what we've lost in gaining our modern worldview: the absence of ultimate meaning, the silence of the universe, the weight of freedom without divine guidance. The comedy lets us feel both the comfort and the terror of living in a world where God watches everything, judges everything, orders everything according to perfect justice. That world is claustrophobic and liberating simultaneously. You can't escape judgment, but you always know where you stand. 700 years separate us from Dante's death. The Florence he knew is gone. The political conflicts that consumed him are historical footnotes. The cosmology he believed in has been replaced. The language he wrote in has evolved, yet the poem survives. Not as museum piece or scholarly obligation, but as living literature that continues generating new meanings for new readers. Each generation finds different things in it, brings different questions to it, takes away different answers. This adaptability wasn't guaranteed. Most medieval literature requires specialists to appreciate. It's too distant, too alien to modern sensibility. Dante somehow remains accessible despite his distance. Perhaps because he was already distant from his own time, already alienated, already writing from exile. The man who wrote the comedy died in Ravenna in September 1321, still banned from Florence, still hoping for return, still convinced of his righteousness. He was 56. He'd spent the final 20 years wandering, writing, surviving on patronage. He never saw Florence again. The city only pardoned him posthumously, centuries later, when his fame made the exile embarrassing. By then it didn't matter. His bones stayed in Ravenna. Florence got an empty tomb. That empty tomb is fitting. Dante's real monument is the comedy. Everything else, his life, his politics, his personal grievances, all of it fed into the poem and was transformed by it. What remains is the work. And the work remains because it dared to map the unmappable, to chart the geography of the afterlife, to judge the entire world, to claim knowledge of divine justice, to write salvation. The audacity is breathtaking. Who does that? Who thinks they can write themselves and everyone they know into eternal judgment? Who believes their personal vision of justice reflects God's? Dante did, and somehow, impossibly, he pulled it off.